The Book of Enoch is a controversial book taken out of the Bible for canonical discrepancies. And I don't know enough about biblical academia to pretend to know why. Because trying to get to absolute truth by reading the Bible is like trying to get to the truth of our present time by reading Harry Potter. Impossible, because it is a story that has been edited for whatever reason. Stuff added or things taken out, like the Book of Enoch, and the fact that stories were taken out leads me to believe that it can't be absolute truth, because if it was, it would be untouched in only one version. But I still fear that there's relevance to the content of the Bible, and by extension, books that they took out of the Bible. And those books may be even more true and may have more absolute truth, which is why they took them out and excluded them from the published version, like the King James version. But the stories in the Book of Enoch are very interesting, to say the least. But the one about the fallen angels or the Watchers, which I think is the first one, I think is in the first book, and that one, because it's multiple books, but in that one about the Watchers, it had me thinking about the interpretation of the text. And what if it's not talking about angels in a religious sense, but just beings of different abilities? Look at what we call people that we see on TV. We call them stars because they are in the public and they are on display like stars in the night sky, not because they are literally glowing balls of plasma. So we have to stop taking ancient writings so literal, or at least, if you're going to, be consistent. And don't take one passage literal and then say another one is metaphorical, because the reason I say that is when something is true, there is no confusion. You know what is literal and what is not. But in the Book of Enoch, it talks about the Watchers being fallen angels, and they rebelled against God and decided to come down to earth to wife the daughters of men. Now I'll get into why this particular story stood out to me at the end of the video, but they came down to breed with women, they created the Nephilim. And the Nephilim are basically deformed beasts. You know, like that's basically what they are. You ever see like a liger? That's basically what they. I mean, it's a comparison, because a liger is a mix of a male lion with a female tiger, and they the biggest cat, but they kind of look deformed and they can't survive in the wild because of their insufficient genealogy. Now you can imagine a different, larger species breeding with humans that were at least compatible enough to produce an offspring. Now, the possibility of that offspring becoming deformed beasts becomes a little more plausible. And we know that when we go against nature's laws, it usually ends in catastrophe. Or the Nephilim became a bigger problem because they were giants that were hungry for people. They had a hunger for flesh. They had a hunger because they were so big and their appetite was just overwhelming. So it wasn't enough to feed them, so they began to eat people and animals and just savages. They were destructive and disruptive to the natural balance. Now, destructive and a hunger for people sounds a little too familiar and current. We see the destruction around us every day, and we know from the files that was released, eating people and drinking blood is not a conspiracy theory. Okay, so if the story has some truth, it would make sense that some people today would have some of those characteristics. In the Book of Enoch, God sends a flood to destroy the Nephilim and start over. The flood story is, we know, not a myth because of water erosion on the Sphinx in Egypt. And many cultures have flood stories and stories about a Noah-type figure. So I think that the flood has definitely happened. It's proven. There's evidence. You can ignore it all you want, but to me, that's proof of a flood at one point happening on this planet. And if some people were able to survive, then why couldn't some of the Nephilim also survive? Over time, they devolved into Neanderthals, bred with Homo sapiens, and now we have a subspecies of unnatural beings controlling our world. The Nephilim sounds similar to Neanderthals, and we know that the Neanderthals bred with a species of people. So it makes sense to me that a lot of inhumane things that we see people do is a product of interspecies breeding. Because why would a species born to this planet naturally and have everything they need have this unquenchable thirst to destroy that same planet? It doesn't make sense from an evolutionary aspect, but a species that isn't born on this planet would have a different relationship with it. It would be more disconnected. It makes sense for them not to care about the well-being of the earth because they didn't come from it. Now, everything I say is all circumstantial evidence, but my last point is either a massive coincidence or the story of the Watchers may have some validity. They were supposedly 200 fallen angels. Now, that number can just be random or a random number that whoever wrote the Book of Enoch chose to use in the story. But when you Google how many impact craters have been found on Earth, that number may not be so random because it is 200. Now, those impact craters are not just from recent impacts. That is the number of impacts for the entire life of the planet. The Book of Enoch is dated to be over thousands of years old because it was found to be within the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you have 200 fallen angels. And over the span of billions of years, we have approximately 200 documented impact craters on this planet. Coincidence? Let me know what y'all think.